This is of significance, timely significance. Is your website accessible? Yesterday morning, I'm on the board of directors, as Bert said, of the Chamber of Commerce. Yesterday morning, I got a call from a local business who's a chamber member who said, I've just found out we're being sued because they say our website is not compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And websites, the ADA prohibits discrimination against disabilities in places of public accommodation. For a period of time, websites were not considered places of public accommodation, but now they largely are, and they are in the First Circuit, which is where we are. And so that's a problem. And part of the problem is, if you were to say to me, Gene, what are the standards? I would have to say to you, there are none. The Department of Justice has been implemented a rulemaking proceeding in 2016 that has never come to fruition. So there's not a lot of guidance.
Section 508.
Yeah. No, that applies to federal websites. That doesn't apply to all websites. So, but there are a lot of lawsuits. There are over 2,200 in federal court last year. And like, remember I was talking about those copyright trolls? Well, there are lawyers who just churn out these lawsuits. There's one guy in New York who's filed over 800 of these lawsuits. And so government-funded websites have to be compliant. That's Section 508. Commercial websites, generally you should think about being compliant. And that also applies to your mobile apps. So, first reaction people sometimes have is, oh my God, more regulation, just what I need. But also think about it in another way. According to the Census Bureau, 1 in 5 individuals in this country claim some sort of disability. So if your website is not accessible to people with disabilities, and accessible largely means being able to function with various types of assisted technologies. You are depriving yourself of a significant portion of potential customers. So,
can you give us an example? What would be a website that doesn't comply versus one that does?
Abraham?
Images that don't have alt tags.
That's one. There are one type of there's a device called a screen reader that people who are blind can use to access websites. Not all of the coding in websites is accessible with a screen reader. That would be a website that would be viewed as not being in compliance. Let me get to there are guidelines that have been developed, and while they are not required as a matter of law, they are generally viewed as being, if you are complying with these, you're viewed as being compliant, certainly by the Department of Justice. And secondly, what you find when you look at the complaints and lawsuits that are filed, typically, and this will get to why so many are being filed, typically what happens is the lawsuit demands as part of its remedy that you make your website compliant with these guidelines. Now, what happens is typically there's not a lot of damages. The plaintiff, the individual with the disability, doesn't get a lot of money. But who does? The lawyer. Yes, sir. Give that man a prize. And so there's an incentive for lawyers to file these lawsuits, and they're responding to the incentive. So these are just some excerpts from the guidelines. So there's 4 guiding principles, and then there's 12 guidelines. And one is perceivable. It has to be perceivable to the individuals with disabilities, such as text alternatives to non-text content. Operable, it has to function with, if it functions all from a keyboard, that's helpful. Avoid content that causes seizures, probably a good idea without the ADA. Understandable, it's got to operate in predictable ways so that people with disabilities can follow it. And robust, by which they mean it's got to be stay with existing technology and then as technologies move forward. So the good news on this is that a lot of websites contain content already that you may not even be aware is accessible. But I think there's an article that at the end of this presentation, I've listed some resources, and one of them is an article about making your website compliant, and it includes links not only to the guidelines, but also to how you can test your website for compliance and determine whether or not you are compliant.